Welcome to Harvest to Pour, the business of beverages, with your host, Matthew Shipp. This is the podcast for all of those who are involved in the agriculture all the way to the distribution of beverages. And now your host, Matthew Shipp.
Hello, this is Matthew Shipp here with Harvest to Pour, the business of beverages. I'm here today with Nick Colombo of Switchgrass Spirits here in St. Louis, Missouri. How you doing?
I'm doing great. Trying to stay cool.
Trying to stay cool. Yeah, we are here at their distillery in the basement of the very large building that has some very cool features to keep their product nice and happy and cool and warm. So we'll get into that later. Nick, tell me a little about yourself. How'd you get into doing what you do now?
I was actually doing international nonprofit work, development work in Africa and Central America, but I worked at breweries on the weekends because it's a very fun, part-time job. And then I wanted to start a brewery, and then there was way too many breweries starting, and so I decided to start a distillery instead.
Oh, okay. And you found some friends to do this with.
It's true. My wife, Sarah, came along. Actually, later on, she kept her job for a while, and Pat and I started off. He quit his job second, we like to say, and then Sarah quit her job last. But,
all right,
yeah.
So you led this parade into what you're doing now.
For better or worse, yeah.
For better or worse. So, well, let me. How'd you get started with Switchgrass? What made you decide to go from, like you said, breweries? You said you have a brewery background, and you moved that into distilling.
Actually, yeah, my background's in developing economies in Africa and Central America, so I knew what effect manufacturing had on a local economy. And I'm from St. Louis, and I really wanted to bring money into the community of St. Louis and the farmland around it and the oak trees around it. And I just knew that I could probably pull off a distillery and keep all the money we made reinvested in the community. So that's I'm very financially and economics motivated. I also like whiskey and, like having fun and working with people who like whiskey and stuff like that.
When you're starting to build Switchgrass, what were some of the bigger challenges you ran into?
Funding is a challenge, but we did all right. We worked with friends and family, and we did a lot of the work ourselves that usually you hire people to do. There's always all small business owners know challenges. There's always new challenges. Honestly, the bigger challenge is knowing which ones to address first and triaging those challenges to make sure you're getting returns on your time and money. I don't know. To game theory,
Okay. Was there any acquiring the building, finding the building, getting this guy up, running?
Yeah, honestly, we looked for a long time, not on the north side of St. Louis, to try and find enough dry square feet to age barrels. A huge part of our expense of our company is aging barrels. And you just need square feet, cubic feet, actually, to do it right. And then we looked on the north side, and we found a building. We bought it for cash like a month later. So we don't pay a mortgage. That really helps our overhead, which allows us to make more barrels, which helps us 4 years from now.
Oh, yeah. Excellent. And we'll talk about 4 years from now. That's a very key point. You also reinvesting into the area with the oak and the region. Right. You want to talk a little about that? Yeah,
we try to source all of our ingredients. We don't buy whiskey. % of our things we need to sell whiskey from here. I mean, our boxes are from here. Our oak is from here. Our corks are from Portugal. But I mean, that's relatively small. Here, I think. Most of everything else, our apples are from here. I don't know. We tried as hard as we can to source locally.
Okay. And that kind of goes back into the ethos of Switchgrass Spirits.
Right. Yeah. Native prairie grass. I don't know. A lot of my family has horticulture degrees, and I've spent a lot of time on the East Coast, and a lot of people think the Midwest is just flyover. But to treat switchgrass with respect is part of what we do as a company. It's a native prairie. Is pretty cool, and slow down when you look at it.
So is that where the name comes from, the switchgrass?
Right. I spent time in the Flint Hills of Kansas, and I just remember how easy it is to pass it by and how beautiful that landscape is. So we wanted to have a business that showed ingredients. And
okay, you've got a small but mighty team, but how would you say your team's communication contributes to the success of Switchgrass?
I'd say we all started this business for the same reason. And we all know the challenges that are out there. Not just our team, but our investors. A bunch of friends and family came together to start this place.
Okay,
So we like to say we're crowdsourced and worker owned. It's just like a very different type of business model. I mean, I did start it, but I don't make all the choices for the company.
Okay.
A lot of that is built into how we manage and run the company too.
Is
so yeah.
Give me an example. What's
setting up sales goals and production budget is a proposal that Pat and Sarah and I, Sarah and I will present what we think we can sell for the year. Pat will present what he can make for the year with that budget. And then we kind of just come together on an agreement for those things. And then we hold each other accountable for those, quotas and sales goals and stuff. And if we don't hit them, then we, decide what to cut as a team or what to spend the extra money on as a team, So yeah, it's more of a collaboration than a hierarchy. I'd say.
Okay. No, it's great. It's great. And you said you had family come in and help you out with this as well. Do they play a role beyond that?
Yeah, my mom and dad come in and bottle once a week, usually.
That's cool.
I mean, they invested too, but
yeah.
I don't know. Like when we have a new idea for projects, we give it to them to sample and see what they think. And I don't know. We've lived a lot of places. We've got a lot of friends and honestly, a lot of investors that more than 35 investors now that different amounts, 500 up, 5,000 up. But yeah, we try really hard to do right by them. And when we're feeling tired at the end of the day, we know who's.
What do you think your investors see and when they come in and you see your product and try your product? What's
It's fun because we do yearly updates with them. I don't know. Like, I think a lot of them knew me, knew Sarah, knew Pat, and they were like, oh yeah, you're doing a thing. I'll support that. You're paying interest. Like, let's go, but then 4 years late, 5 years, we just paid back our first round of 5-year promissory notes. And I think a lot of them were just like, this is awesome. You guys are really doing it. They live, they see the effect that their investment has, like if you give us $5,000, we're going to make a bunch more barrels. And you could tell them that 4 years ago. And they got now they see how many barrels we have.
Unique long-term investments.
Yeah. So it's like,
tasty payouts.
If you give me money, I'm going to buy more grain and oak.
Yeah.
And I'm going to put it down here and it's going to make way more money in that barrel than it is then I'm going to pay you in interest.
Absolutely.
And you could tell people that. And then that's one thing. And then they can come down here and see it. And it's really cool.
Well, let's get into those barrels a little bit. So
Sure.
The biggest, go over the name of the podcast. Take us from your harvest to your pour journey.
Okay.
So let's start with the sourcing of your ingredients. You said you were talking about Midwest.
Right.
Get as much as Midwest area as you can and help reinvest into this area. So where do you start?
Okay. We make 3 main base products, bourbon, rye, and apple brandy. They all come from different places. The bourbon and rye are made of 4 different grains: corn, wheat, rye, and barley. There's no corn in our rye, and there's no rye in our bourbon. So each of our 2 main products is bourbon and rye. So bourbon's mostly corn, then barley and wheat. The rye is mostly rye and then barley and wheat. So it's a very different. The base ingredient changes a lot. The corn and the wheat come from Missouri, Indiana. We haven't bought from Kansas yet, but Illinois, even Pennsylvania, as far like from this watershed. Those are all southern mid-latitude crops. The rye comes from up north, Michigan, Wisconsin, around Minneapolis sometimes. But those rye overwinters, and you get more protein when you grow it up north.
Okay.
So we care a lot about the protein content, and we have not found a high protein southern rye yet. And when we do, we will switch to that. But our apples actually come from Washington, Missouri.
Oh, really?
So far, they've come from, we buy full tanker trucks of apple cider. That's about 100 pallets of apples. And that makes about 7 to 10 barrels, 50-gallon barrels of brandy.
Wow.
So 5,000 to 8 barrels is our ratio. And that's We do that about once a year, but that's probably our most local ingredient is the apple. And then our oak comes from north of St. Louis, a little town called Silex, Missouri. There's a lumber mill and cooperage there that buys timber from local farmers. Anybody who can put logs on their truck.
You really keep it to the region.
Yeah, the white oak. Yeah, that, and also the most barrels in the world come from Missouri. Most of it comes from southern Missouri. Ours come from northern. It's got a little bit tighter of a grain.
Mm-hmm.
Evaporates a little less. We think it definitely saves money on the Angel's share, but we think it tastes better too. So
yeah, no, that's perfect. Let me know about that. Why do you like these higher proteins so much? What do you think? What does it add in your process?
It adds oily, like rich grain complexity flavors. So a lot of the work we do as distillers is to separate out the flavors of our ingredients, the stuff we put in the still, to make sure the stuff we put in the still tastes good. And then as it comes out, we pick and choose what is coming out to be what we age. The high protein oil content really helps with the back end, the like oily, think extract oil of rye or extract oil of wheat or barley. Corn doesn't have that much.
So it plays more into the flavor palette.
Yeah,
what you're getting
the rich like oily finish, like the pancakes, the cornbread, the fresh baked bread flavors you get on especially our older stuff, really comes through because of that high protein content and because we don't sacrifice that for high proof ethanol flavors.
Now, so we're kind of getting into those proteins and your still. So take us through that whole your mash process. And I really liked in the end. I want to tell us about kind of your level of flavor pull-offs. I think that's really great. That's a really neat way of people to visualize it.
Okay, so you want me to just go through like manufacturing?
Well, I found it interesting that, again, I'm new for as far as the way you're processing it, but you kind of brew a beer first.
True. So we start off with grain. It's ground. It's pretty fine. We put it with water, hold it at the right temperatures with the right enzymes, and the starch in that grain becomes, first gel and then sugar. The enzymes break down the complex starch chains into more easily converted sugar chains.
Mm-hmm.
We cool it down, and then we add yeast. We don't add lactobacillus and Brettanomyces, which is what most distilleries use. Most distilleries make a sour beer. We make an ale. So it's just it's a fundamentally different manufacturing process. It's a lot more liking to a brewery than a brewery that doesn't make sour beers than to a big commercial distillery. I know why they do it. It's because it's way consistent. Like using bacteria is like way easier. It doesn't care about acid content, doesn't care about temperature. It'll convert way more of your starch to sugar. We don't care about that. We care about the flavor of the stuff we're putting into the still and how acidic it is.
And that comes from your background of being brewers.
Right. Yeah. Okay. My background was in breweries. I'm just way more comfortable using yeast than I am with using bacteria. And the stuff we put into our still tastes fundamentally different and way less acidic than most distilleries. And we're just like really proud of all that extra work we do.
Yeah, I really like that.
We call it sweet mashing.
Sweet mashing. Okay. Yeah. I like that unique approach. And you said you are getting a different flavor palette from this.
Yeah, it's hugely different. We get a lot of apples and cherries on the front end. We get just way less harsh stuff, way less high proof alcohol flavors off, and real high burn flavors come from just over extraction and being greedy with your cuts and like your manufacturing process. We like intentionally sacrifice yield per pallet of grain to get more of our flavor into the bottles that we sell at the stores.
Okay. When you mentioned cuts, are you talking about those pools you have?
Right. That's another.
Talk about that.
Yeah, that's another huge difference we have as a manufacturer is we don't run a continuous column. We do what's called batch distilling or pot distilling. Mm-hmm. So you put a bunch of alcoholic beer grain in it into the still, you heat it up, and the most volatile elements and compounds evaporate first as you add more and more energy to that mash. That first stuff that comes off is methyl alcohol, and it tastes like gasoline mixed with chalk. It's very it will kill you
Yeah.
if you drink it. So obviously we don't keep that. The next thing that comes off is like very delicious, very sweet, like high proof apples and cherries flavor. So it's Pat's job to know the difference of what to keep and what to throw out. That just doesn't happen at most distilleries. Most distilleries just open valves on the back of their column and they get what they get.
Mm-hmm.
We pick and choose every batch what flavors we keep and choose to put in our barrels. That's called making cuts. We make our cuts by taste. We've found that the most consistent and best way to guarantee that we don't have those off flavors is just to literally taste what's coming out. Instead of knowing the boiling points or knowing what time it is in the run, we just pick and choose what we keep or what we throw out by literally what it tastes like. And that's hard to do. Pat's very good at it. Okay. So that's why we do it that way.
Okay. That leads into my next question is kind of your own unique process of doing this, and you have some manual ways of doing it. What are some of your biggest challenges in your process?
Biggest challenges in our process are like the manufacturing on the day-to-day process is, consistency. You can, if it's 120 degrees in here, it's hard to cool everything off consistently. And they will change the flavor. Like it'll go from changing our mash or yeast will make it change. If it goes too hot, it'll taste like bananas instead of apples and cherries. So it's just a very different, yeast is fussy. I'm used to dealing with it. Mm-hmm. We have ways of working around it. If it's 100 degrees outside, it's hard to cool something off to 80 degrees to add your yeast. Mm-hmm. Like just the challenges of sweet mashing. We think it's worth it. We think our product speaks for itself, but that's a challenge. Honestly, the biggest challenge on the macro level is scaling. We sell a lot of young whiskey right now, and it's very well received critically. And from our customers, it tastes smooth in a way that young whiskeys should not taste because of all that extra work we do. That has resulted in us. It's very hard to turn down money now in exchange for more money later as a business. So like scaling financially is very difficult. We turn down distributors who want to sell our young whiskey in order to sell older, more high margin whiskey later. That is hard to do.
You have a wonderful problem.
I'm not complaining. Like, don't get me wrong, but it is a challenge to be like, actually, no, I don't want you to sell my stuff now. Thanks, though. I'll get back to you in a couple of years when we're selling $70 bottles instead of $30 bottles. It's just very counterintuitive for most American startups. Like all salespeople are like, you want to make the deal? Let's make the deal. And I'm like, actually, let's make more money later.
Long tail deals and stuff.
Right.
Okay.
But that's honestly part of like our building allows us to do that. The fact that we're work-around allows us to do that. Owners work for this company and they get it. Our building, we wrote a check for. We own this place outright and we don't pay a rent or mortgage. Like that allows us to make those hard choices in what's best for the company. So not to get too deep in the weeds, like finance wise, but yeah, like honestly, that is, you ask the operations and finance guy, I say scaling. I'm sure Sarah has a very different answer.
No,
Pat
this is
too.
great.
Yeah, it's just really different, like kind of business, like high asset manufacturing.
Yeah.
It's just like a really weird type of business to be in this country.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So,
this is great news. I really like this information.
Cool.
Speaking of, since we're in the process, you talked about the building. The building is really part of your process.
It really is.
Even from the water, the way the water's being drawn in, and how your barrels breathe. And I thought that was, you told me that earlier, how your way the barrels breathe and what that does to your whiskey. You can go into that a little bit?
I can talk about the building and the effect it has on it really is a part of our equipment. When we were looking for buildings, we did water analysis on every place we were thinking about buying. And the north side's water is it comes from underneath a limestone bluff. So it's really high alkali, really low sulfur and iron. And it's just like very, very good water for distilling. Yeah, limestone high alkali water is so good for so many reasons. Like a lot of the stuff we do in the process adds acidity. And if you could start off with high alkalinity, you just have a bigger runway to play with and to experiment and make sacrifices. And if you start off with high acid, you just don't have as many options as distillers. So that's just the water in this building. The second part was that Pat and I did like a 1.5 year build out, replaced a lot of the floor with the slab because it couldn't hold 1,000-gallon tanks. It just wasn't engineered for that. So we hired an engineer. We reinforced a lot of it. But one of the best things we did, besides putting in sloping floor drains, is we zip tied PEX to all the rebar in the new slab. And now we pump our cooling water through the slab, and it turned our whole building into a heat exchanger. And that cools our water for free, heats our building for free, and saves a ton of water in our manufacturing process. And it's amazing in the winter, and it's really hard on the humans in the summer because it's very hot.
In here. Yeah.
The effect it has on the barrels is really interesting. We didn't expect it. Basically, when you pump heat into barrels in the wintertime for 4 days in a row, it gets up to like 75 degrees in the barrel room, and all the air in those barrels heats up, expands, and you could see them all start leaking. All the leakers leak on Wednesday because that high pressure air is forcing all the whiskey in through the charcoal into that oak. And then on Saturday, they all start shrinking down again. And all that air starts sucking in. All the whiskey comes out of the wood and back into the main chamber of the barrel. And then Tuesday, they all start heating up again. And it's just like that breathing of the barrels is called Madeirification. When you go from Europe to Madeira, you cross the equator 8 times or something. I don't remember. But the barrels in those long voyage ships heated up and cooled down a lot, and that was a lot better than the barrels that didn't go through that process. So our building does that every week, and it really has a huge effect on how much the amount of whiskey that comes in contact with different amounts of oak and char of oak and caramelization of those oak staves and sap in them. Like it really has a profound effect on the aging process. So
a really unique secret ingredient to that. The barrels, your barrels live and
it's
breathe.
Like we just wanted to save on our heating bills, but it turns out it has a huge effect on the flavor.
That's awesome.
It's not rapid aging. It's like, because it's not old whiskey. It's just like, it just has a huge effect on the flavors you get out of the oak. It just causes that high proof ethanol to extract those oak extracts a lot faster because it's just more in contact with it than it is in a temperature consistent, high humidity environment. It just doesn't interact.
So we're going to move on to the kind of the pour. So getting this to your client, how do you know? I mean, sometimes you're taking a year to up to 4 years here pretty soon.
Hopefully up to 12 someday.
Hopefully up to 12 someday. And you're taking these pulling and you're doing blends.
Right.
How do you ensure that what you're making that your customer base is going to like?
Okay. When we started off, before we bought equipment, before we took money from people, from investors, we wanted to start a brewery. And the way you build a good, in my opinion, the way you build a craft brewery is by doing your own thing. You don't want to fight Budweiser. You don't want to fight Miller. They are who they are. Everybody who wants a Busch beer is going to buy a Busch beer. Don't try and do that. Do your own thing. Explain to your customers how you did it, and then trust them to know if they like hoppy beers or not. Like, a lot of people don't like hoppy beers. That's fine. A lot of people don't like dark beers. That's fine. Choice we made as a distillery was not to try and beat Kentucky at what Kentucky does best. Mm-hmm. We decided before we started to do our own thing and to just like trust customers to know if they liked it or not. That sweet mashing, that cut by taste, cut by taste and sweet mashing is done in other countries. Mm-hmm. Whiskey that tastes like its ingredients is very popular in Japan and Scotland. Americans historically have liked whiskey that tastes like white oak. We just were like, I don't want to fight that. Like, we're going to do our own thing. We're going to do it in a way that we have experience working with yeast, and we're going to trust our customers. We decided that before we did anything, before we got custom equipment made to do this. That's how we started off, and that's what is making us successful today. Once again, we're not successful with people that live and die Kentucky whiskey. Mm-hmm. Like they're going to like it regardless of how it tastes, or like if ours, the differences of flavor, differences of ingredients. A lot of people care about different stuff, and we just decided to play our own game and stuck with it. And now we're seeing the results of that. And it's very rewarding to see.
Because of these great results you're having, do you see any kind of trends shifting or changing in the distillery whiskey
in the world? Like the industry? Yeah.
I mean, we've had beer with microbreweries and stuff. Now we're getting...
Yeah. I do. I see brands like Clear Creek, Koval, Balcones. There's a lot of brands that aren't trying to be the next Jim Beam. Mm-hmm. And they're making toasted barrel 100% wheat whiskey. You know, like they're putting chocolate malt in their rye. They're making single malts with beer ingredients. Like they're doing their own thing, and it's really cool to see. They're getting on some people's radar, not the people who just want to buy Pappy. Other drinkers and the people that actually care how whiskey's made really are gravitating. When you put chocolate malt in your rye, you're either going to like that or you won't. It tastes like, the rye tastes like chocolate, and that's cool. And I just really respect them for taking that risk, educating their customers on it, playing that other game that we were talking about. If you make Kirschwasser with cherries from Michigan, like that's honestly, that's so hard to do and cool. As a distiller, I'm going to buy your stuff. If you make a pear brandy in Oregon, yes, do that. We model our business off of European fruit brandy distilleries and Japanese whiskey distilleries. That's what we tried to be. We tried to make our apple brandy as much like a grappa as we could. We don't add any caramel or sugar. It's really light, clean, like almost crisp. You know, that really resonates with certain people. Other people just want you to add a lot of caramel, and they don't like our stuff. That's fine. It's a big world. Certain customers really, really like it. So I don't know. Other brands that do that, I like. Starlight is doing really cool stuff in the middle of nowhere in Indiana. Like I don't know. We definitely modeled our brand and manufacturing processes off of other businesses who we thought were behaving like craft beer before craft beer was popular. The New Belgiums, the Sierra Nevadas, those brands that created entire categories.
So definitely borrowing other process ideas and incorporating into your own.
Right. Yeah. And then pulling it off by buying the right equipment, buying custom manufactured fermenters and doing stuff like that. Like, yeah, that's how we did it though.
All right. No, great. So last couple questions. What, if you have an entrepreneur wanting to start something like you've done, what advice would you have for them today?
It's a combination of having a clear vision and sticking to that, but also knowing when to be flexible and knowing when to compromise and declare a loss and stop. Don't fall into that sunk cost fallacy. But also, if you have the confidence, like for example, don't commit so hard to a building that the building sinks the company. A particular investor or like a business partner, if the majority of your workers agree on a vision, go with that vision. Compromise if you have to get. We had a very clear vision. It was to create a worker-owned distillery that was crowdsourced and behaved a lot like a craft brewery. That hasn't changed. The age of our main product has. Like, we didn't expect to sell so much young whiskey. That is a terrible idea when you're starting out because it blows your reputation on everybody thinks that your label tastes like gasoline. But we compromised. We did it, and now we're in a better spot. We didn't think we'd be on the north side of St. Louis. We did. We're in a better spot. Like, we didn't, we've had challenges. Honestly, as long as you're willing to, as long as you've got that vision, as long as other people see it, and as long as you can keep everybody on track, it's going well. I don't know. Ask me in 2 years, like what our big problem is. We're talking to out-of-state distributors now. We're talking to talking to distributors in France. Like, we're changing. Our company has changed become a new business every 2 years.
Wow.
So it's very different than selling self-distro during a pandemic and just doing farmers markets. Like, we're in a very different spot now.
Wow. And I forgot to ask, how long have you been in business?
We started distilling about 4 years ago.
4 years ago. Okay.
We've been in business. I quit my job like 6 or 7 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
We've had a distributor for about a year and a half.
The other fun question I like to ask is, do you have a favorite here? Everybody has. I know. It's so possible.
I know. I love all my babies. I really like the apple brandy. That's probably the one I'm the most proud of, just because of its impact on the local economy. The one I probably drink the most of is the straight rye. I think it's the most they're totally opposite flavor wise. I don't know. I drink a lot of the apple brandy too, but the apple brandy is really light and clean. Think like light lager, really clean, like summer, drink it after you cut the grass kind of a thing. The rye is like barley wine. It's like really heavy and rich and complex. Not what you would want on a hot day.
I think I'll have to try some of that apple brandy after the show here. That sounds great. And then finally, this is going to go. Do you have any upcoming events, promotions? I know you were talking about, we keep on talking about 4 years. You want to talk about that 4-year barrel?
So our barrels are getting older, and we're working on 4-year labels right now. That's probably what we're most excited about as a company, is this winter's releases. So we're going to release our bottled and bond rye, our bottled and bond bourbon, and this year's single malt. We release a new single malt every year, but we built this building and our business to sell bottled and bond 4-year whiskey, bottled at 100 proof, distilled, aged, and bottled in the same building. It's just a very hard category to comply with, like federally. It's honestly very hard to insure. So a lot of the big brands can't get insurance if they age in the same place they distill. We committed to this 4 years ago, and our barrels are about to be in compliance. Our whiskey is about to be in compliance, and we're going to start. It's going to change our company forever. We're going to start selling. We're going to go to export markets with this new product that, we don't have a label for yet, but the labels we do have look very good. We're working on. So honestly, that's what I'm most excited for. Sarah will have very different answers for upcoming events because she actually does all the coordination and planning. And
I'll have to ask her about that.
The event calendar is in her head, not mine.
That's fine. No, I'll ask her. We'll get a list for everybody. We'll put that in the show notes. Links with where Switchgrass Spirits will be showing up. You're also going to be teaching a couple of whiskey schools here locally as well.
We're working with our local accounts, like our bigger liquor stores that do educational events for their customers. We're trying to do more of these, meet the distiller, do a tasting, but have the distiller explain how the flavors got in those bottles. We're really excited to do that, since we do make our own whiskey and a lot of places don't. We do a lot of extra work to make it taste good. We love explaining that to our customers directly.
I also like to remind the listeners that this is a team of 3 doing this. So this is really, really impressive.
Yeah, we have 3 full-time employees, and we all wear many hats, but one of my hats is teaching whiskey schools and, liquor stores and restaurants. So I can do that. It's very good for business. So I like to do it. Check an eye out on our website or for that calendar or social media. Social media is probably the best. But we also have a events tab on our website.
Okay. Well, Nick, thanks again for your time. I hope everybody enjoyed this. I learned a lot. I mean, everything from your flavored table to the barrels breathing and the uniqueness of that. So, again, thanks a lot for your time. And for we end up here, I'm going to try some of that apple.
Let's go.
Really curious. Yeah, let's go. All right. Thanks a lot, Nick.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to Harvest to Pour, the business of beverages with Matthew Shep. Check the show notes for our guest contact information and connect with Matthew Shep on LinkedIn today.